Okay, good morning and welcome everybody. Happy spring. I hope you enjoyed the photos we had from our seed sale that were looping before the meeting started. And for anyone joining us for the first time, I just want to say a little bit about Wild Ones. We are a national nonprofit 501c3 organization dedicated to educating about the benefits of native plants and natural landscaping to support biodiversity using environmentally sound organic landscaping practices. Our chapter, the Mountain Laurel chapter, is sponsored by the Connecticut College Arboretum in New London. We look forward to some outdoor programs later this season that will take advantage of their extensive native plant collection and natural areas. Today's agenda, it'll be very simple. I'm going to make a few brief announcements, then introduce our guest speaker who will give her program. And toward the end, there will be time to share your news of any upcoming events of interest and also to answer your questions about growing native plants from seed. So spring is sprung and there's still tons of good webinars being offered. I just want to mention 3, and Fatima is going to paste the links into the chat, which you can then save if you want to have a closer look at them and perhaps sign up later on. The first one is an author speaker series from Ohio State University Entomology Department. And it's a series of new book talks this coming week, every day, Monday through Friday at 10 o'clock. A different author will talk about their new book that's coming out. And this will include Doug Tallamy about oaks, Heather Holm about wasps, Brian Danforth, I think about native bees, Olivia Carroll, and Mary Gardner. So I think it's going to be an excellent series of talks and also give you a sneak preview of some of the new gardening books that will be available this year. And some of them I'm sure are available either digitally or for pre-order. Avalonia Land Conservancy, in conjunction with the Long Island Sound Study Futures Fund, that's a mouthful, is co-sponsoring a series of talks on planning and planting a resilient coastal forest in southeastern Connecticut. So if you enjoyed our February talk on forests, this is something you won't want to miss, and it'll teach you a lot about what new forestry practices are being implemented to try to bolster our coastal forests and help us with coastal resiliency. And then finally, the the Ecological Landscape Alliance is, for a second year, going to hold a series of free webinars, Wednesday Walks in the Garden, starting at the end of March and ending in June. Most or all of these will be recorded, but you can sign up to watch them either live or get the recordings at the posted link. They are a terrific organization. A lot of their material does require some payment to cover costs. So this is a real treat to have them offer these free webinars. Okay, now on to our featured presentation. Let me just preface this by saying that during the presentation, I would ask that you please mute your mics and turn off your video. That will optimize the program quality for everyone, particularly people who do not have the fastest internet connections. Today we have with us Sefra Alexandra, sometimes known as the Seed Huntress. She's an endurance race ethnobotanist who's on a perennial expedition to save the seeds of our wild and cultivated lands. That is, our native plants and our food crops that are so important. She has fortified community seed banks internationally on island nations after natural disasters, including Haiti and the British Virgin Islands. She's conducted field work in the South Pacific as a Gene Bank Impacts Fellow for the Crop Trust, hunted for rare endangered seeds for Seeds of Success in Idaho, and revived an allium heirloom, the Southport Globe onion, one of our very own Connecticut heirlooms. And she's going to tell you more about that during her talk. And she is currently the lead of Connecticut Nofa's, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association's Pollinator Health Initiative, the Ecotype project, which you may have heard me mention previously. Well, today she's going to give you all of the details. This past spring, as a kind of an offshoot of the Ecotype project, she conducted an 87-mile canoe journey. She took an 87-mile canoe journey down the Connecticut River, planting 500 native plants along the way in pollinator gardens and educating people about the importance of doing this. So Sefra is a Wings World Quest flag carrier, which is a very elite club of adventurous women, a member of the Explorers Club, and she holds a master's in agroecology from Cornell University. So instead of saying any more, I'm going to welcome Sefra and let her take it away.
Thanks, Lydia, and hello to all the wild ones. I have to say, Lydia has been helping champion this work with CT Nofa since before I even joined on. So I just want to thank her and all of the work she's done as one of the strategic supporters through the Native Plant Working Group. And I love the ethos and the mission of what Wild One stands for, and congratulations on such a successful seed sale. So with that, I will start sharing my screen, and we can go on this great seed safari of how conservation works internationally, nationally, locally, and then we'll talk about eco-regionally. So let's just make sure you can all see my screen? Lydia, is that look good?
Yes, yes, you are on. You are not, I guess people can put you to full screen to get the best appreciation of your presentation. And also let me just interject for a moment. If you have questions for Sefra, as we have been doing, please type them into chat and we'll take them at the end. I think that makes for the smoothest presentation. And in fact, some of them may get answered along the way by some of our other members. So, you know, feel free to have a quiet conversation in the chat while the presentation's going on, but I don't think we'll want to miss a minute of what Sefra has to say. Okay.
Oh, all right. Well, hopefully I can just help to really, for me as the Seed Huntress, which is just my dedication to helping conserve wild and cultivated seeds all around the world. I've been doing that in a number of different fashions and facets, and I think it's helpful to kind of start out from that eagle eye view of how seed conservation works on a global scale. And then as the topic of this talk is ecotypes, ecoregions, and ecological restoration, I will certainly define all of those terms and help us get more place-based locally in terms of native plants. So this is me in the Cook Islands doing field work around a crop called taro, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So first of all, this was a great article. I was honored to be featured by Forbes. And as the world knows, you know, a lot of people talk about the animal species that are going extinct, but in fact, a lot of our cultivated crops and wild plants are also going extinct. So helping to highlight the need to really focus on the preservation of the biodiversity globally, I went and applied to be a fellow for the Crop Trust. And the Crop Trust, which I'll show you in just a bit, is the organization that oversees our world seed banking systems. So before I explain that, how do we know where to put our world seed banks, and how did this all come about? Well, the wonderful Russian botanist Nikolai Vavilov in the early 1900s, he was going on all of these botanical expeditions around the world. And through his observations of where these crop wild relatives, so when we have our cultivated field crops, they have wild relatives such as the teosinte, which was this tiny little pebble-like grass that over thousands of years of stewardship became the cultivated crop we know as maize or as corn. So what he was doing on his travels is noting where these crops first emerged, or their centers of origin, is where they express the greatest amounts of diversity. And that, in effect, so you have your maize and wheat in Mexico, you have your pulses and grains in India, you have your potatoes in Peru, and we can start to look at our world map in terms of where these crops emerged. And that is where the gene bank, the International Gene Bank platform, these little circles represent these international seed banks. So you can see over Mexico, where you can see the corn and the wheat, that's where all of our world's diversity of maize and wheat seeds are safeguarded. So in terms of man-made and natural disasters, if they were ever wiped out in the fields where they occur naturally or where they're cultivated, there's a genetic backup. So this is called ex situ conservation. It means away from the place where they grow. In situ means in the soil. Ex situ means we have it in a cold storage backup. So you can see over Kenya, you have the Agroforestry Center, and then all the way over in Fiji, which is CPAC, the Center for Pacific Crops and Trees. That's where I did my field work talking about the crop taro. So up in that little picture up top, in that little in vitro glass tube, you can see a little baby taro. Not all seeds can be, if you look below, you see seeds as we may normally think of them in a seed bank, just like your tomato, your pepper seeds that can be dried out or desiccated and stored for long periods of times. Those are orthodox seeds, and any vegetable that has orthodox seeds, the seeds can be saved like that. But oftentimes in the tropics, the seeds or the tubers are recalcitrant, which means if they were ever to fully dry out or desiccate, they lose their viability. So to maintain the genetic integrity of these taro, for example, they have to be kept as little plantlet propagules. And that's how we maintain the vegetative diversity of that species. So perhaps some of you have heard of Svalbard, the global seed vault. Some people call it the doomsday vault, but it's really this brilliant system where each country sends a backup of all of their world seeds. So as in Syria, when they had civil unrest and their seed bank was actually bombed, if there wasn't a backup of that, all of those ancient heritage and grains and crops that have been in those soils since time immemorial would have been lost. And that has that adapted genetics that we need to be able to adapt to however the climate shifts. So this is me with the great taro, Colocasia esculenta. It's a staple food crop through around much of subsistence farming nations around the world. And certainly in the South Pacific, as an ethnobotanist, it's a totem crop. It's given in rituals of birth, in life, of marriage and death. It's their staple food crop and their main export. And unfortunately, what they experienced was something similar to what happened with the Irish potato famine, where because these plants are all vegetatively propagated, they all have the exact same genetics. So in essence, even though you see a little bit of phenological differentiation where some stems are morphological, red or yellow, actually, when it comes down to it, they all have the same genetics. It's almost a monoculture. So unfortunately, this blight washes in onto the shores of Samoa in 1993, and within 3 weeks, all the crops had been wiped out. So what my work does, and this video is on my website, theseedhuntress.com, because I don't think we have enough time to show all these videos. But what my work really showed was that these botanists had to, maybe I can have the video playing while I'm talking and turn the sound off. These botanists had to go back out into these different centers of origin, and they had to recollect all of the diversity of taro that expressed this resistance to this Phytophthora, to this blight that wiped everything out. And what happened is after they gathered all of those different seeds, that's what started the seed bank. Then the breeders spent 10 years finding a crop that was resistant to this blight. And now that is housed in their seed bank. So when Nigeria in 2012 faced the same sort of blights, these plants were able to be distributed immediately and stave off 10 years of possible famines or huge economic downturns. And so what this really shows is the preservation of these genetics in our global seed banks is vital to ensuring that we have food security and seed sovereignty around the world. So you can see all of these cartoons were actually drawn from pictures I took while on this expedition. I got to see a king bee coronated, and it's really a fun cartoon, just in an effort to make the importance of this more shareable amongst people who maybe weren't interested in seed banks before. So that's quickly how our international seed banking system works. My brother and I have a company called Tactivate, and Tactivate does international disaster response. My brother works from the medical logistics operations side, and I work from the food security side. And so what often happens in these natural disasters is your fields from a hurricane or tsunami or so forth, all of your field crops are wiped out. And again, in these subsistence farming nations, there isn't really a seed bank or seed vault that you can go to replant your seeds. Most of these farmers just have seeds stored for their next season underneath their beds or in their room. And when it comes to a fact where all of their crops are wiped out, their backup planting seed they have to use as their food crop. So what happens is the USAID and all of these well-intentioned relief organizations will come in and provide relief seed, which in Haiti they call Miami seed. Well, it's actually North Carolinian grown white rice oftentimes. And what that does is actually undercuts the agroeconomic system in Haiti, because there's still rice farmers in the north, but now everyone's just waiting for this free rice. And what that does is really not only build a regenerative, self-reliant relief system, but actually is introducing seed that's not viable and may not be able to be planted or do well, can introduce pests, and has a whole litany of other problems. So here you can see the seed bank in the south. This was a project that I went under grant funding from Virgin Galactic. I'd worked for the Branson family, and they supported this initiative. And I met this wonderful gentleman, the agronome Ilie Saint-Magloire, and he is the head agronomist for the Southern Department of Haiti. And he oversees 25 farm managers who then oversee thousands of other small scale farm managers. So what I worked with him to do was to fortify his community seed bank, because that community seed bank is able to safeguard these bioregionally adapted, these seeds that have been adapted to the soils and the climates of Haiti, that have the taste profiles that that the citizens of Haiti enjoy. And what we've done is through having certain reducing the humidity, having the right tools to desiccate your seed. Even glass jars are very difficult to get down in Haiti. So just being able to send these basic supplies, they're able to save their own seeds. So if and when these natural disasters happen, they can self-facilitate their own regenerative restoration, and they can replant their fields immediately and not have to use their backup seed. And so that's often a lot of the work that I'm doing on these island nations, predominantly after these types of disasters. Again, there's a fun video on my website that explains this project a bit more in depth. And then, so now we've gone internationally, both from the global scale into disasters, and now we're coming back nationally. So the Seeds of Success program is something that's run out of the Bureau of Land Management. And in the early 2000s, perhaps some of you have heard of the Millennium Seed Bank at the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. Now, the Crop Trust and a lot of their work with those global seed vaults is really safeguarding our cultivated food crops. But there was a bit of a gap in the system for who was safeguarding our wild species, who was safeguarding, as you can see, these beautiful little wildflowers, these Primula alculina. That's me scouting for Primula alculina that grows along these bubbling brooks in Idaho. And the way the Seeds of Success program works is there's little teams of a botanist and 2 seed collectors that are predominantly in the West, because that's where a lot of our governmental lands are. There is, of course, Ed Toth at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, who did the seed collections for the East Coast, and he's a wonderful ally in the Ecotype project, which we'll talk about in a bit. But what the Seeds of Success did is it set up protocols. How do you scout and make sure that you're finding wild populations that are big enough that you can collect 10,000 seeds from that isn't damaging these wild populations? Because in an effort to safeguard these plants in case these very rare and endangered, climate shifting ecotones, especially in the more arid, hot areas, are changed, some of these more rare or any of these wild species hadn't really been seed banked or safeguarded. So you kind of get your seed hunting, Indiana Jones kind of list of the species that you're going out to look for, and you hike miles into the wilderness, into rattlesnake territory where the draba hitchcockii rare plant lives. And that's, you kind of, we were taping cardboard around our legs as snake gators until my dad heard about that and then sent me snake gators. But basically what we did here was, you harvest the seeds, you send it to the Millennium Seed Bank so that they have a backup of these beautiful flowers that hold such significance both to the wildlife and medicinally, if we're talking about herbalism and so forth. And they safeguard the seeds there. And then you make herbaria species that get housed at the Smithsonian as reference points for these rare species. And that's how this has been going on for a while now. So we have a lot of our, more predominant and now more some of the more endangered species of our wildlands nationally safeguarded. The map down in the right is a seed zone map. So you might know about hardiness zones, but there are actually maps that speak to where you can look to find different types of seeds by knowing what their seed zone is. So a lot of research goes into doing this seed scouting, and it is just a dream being out in the wilderness and hiking and rock climbing to look for rare plants. It was a very fun endeavor. And now we come back locally to Connecticut, and I am from the Southport Greens Farms area, which used to be the onion capital of the world. And as you can see here, these farmers were prolific. They were some of the best seed keepers from what was the red Wethersfield onion. That's the seed came down the Connecticut Valley. Originally, the seed came over from Europe. But what these farmers did was farmed it in our lands that had a bit of sand, great drainage, and ended up just being amazing onion cultivation fields. And they became pioneers in inventing new onion tools that some are still used in the trade today, and had some of the best seed houses renowned for the Southport Globe onion because of its storage ability, its high vitamin C. During the wars, it was used as a staple food crop. They would send pickled onions with the troops in an effort to prevent scurvy. Here, we don't really have all the citrus that you would think of in terms of vitamin C, and so onions are a really great source for that. So you can see the massive cultivation, and then the sloops down in Southport Harbor that would bring these onions to the New York City markets, over 200,000 barrels a year. And so everyone was an onion farmer. And I said, as a seed saver and someone who was so excited about all this work, how can I bring back this onion? Because just like what happened to taro in the South Pacific, in Connecticut or in Fairfield County, where these onions are being cultivated, we experienced a smut or a blight as well that absolutely wiped out our entire onion cultivation, and which actually still exists in our soils to this day, which is why really large scale onion farming, you have to do some other types of remediation and things to our soil, of course, using organic integrated practices. But so what we did with the Southport Globe Onion Initiative is I got the seeds back from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, who was still safeguarding this heirloom, the Southport Globe Onion, but I brought it back and planted it back in Southport soils. And onions are biennial, so to save the seed takes 2 years. And this was in the second year. We're now in the third year of the initiative, but these gorgeous, gorgeous flowers emerged. And from that, we were able to collect the first truly Southport grown, Southport Globe onion seed heirloom in 130 years. So what this did was I started an onion festival, went and taught the kids about it in the schools, the garden clubs. Everyone was so excited. And what it really did was just brought the community together around this shared agrarian history. And so I just, I celebrate wherever you are. There's the Macumber turnip in Westport, Massachusetts. There's famous heirlooms everywhere. And this is a really fun way to rally your town and your community about understanding the importance of these bioregionally adapted seed and why we want to have local seed for food security and seed sovereignty, because these are the seeds that do best. So in an effort to share these seeds, I started a seed bank, a seed library at the Pequot Library in Southport. And seed libraries, if you haven't heard of them, function much like you go check out a book and return the book, but here you check out seeds for free. You grow them in your garden. We have great resources on seed saving. And hopefully with onions 2 years or other annuals 1 year, you return some of your seed back to the seed library. And what that does is it fortifies a local resource for locally adapted seed. Again, that's what's going to do best in your soils, with your pests, with your climates, and so forth. And in that vein, we finally come to the Ecotype project. So, as someone who really truly honors the history of land, I want to first start by saying Connecticut is an Algonquin word that references the Long Tidal River. And you can see the beautiful Connecticut River with its headwaters up just over the border of Canada that goes all the way down to the Long Island Sound. And so where I'm from in Greens Farms, that was known as Machimucks, the beautiful land, because the Pagosset tribe, and the Pagosset, that's a word that translates to mean where the mouth of the river, because that's where this river met the Long Island Sound. This is where these great estuaries were the nurseries for so much of the aquatic fish life and bivalve mollusks that proliferate all throughout Long Island Sound. There was the deer and of course the massive chestnuts and the acorns. And so due to how much food and abundance we had, these were some of the most peaceful tribes in the country. And they're famous for their wampum. And so really, when we're talking about ecotypes, which I'll define in just a bit, we're really talking about place-based genetics. And the problem that we found with conservation and restoration is the ornithologists are looking at one map and the hydrologists look at another map and the geologists are referencing a slightly different map and the foresters. And there was this massive need to say, if we want to do conservation and restoration properly, we need to all be working from a shared framework. So this wonderful gentleman, James Obernick at the EPA, and he has some great white papers written about this, he made this mosaic overlay known as ecoregions. So if you just look up EPA ecoregions, you can access these maps and databases. And the first time I saw them, I cried because they're so beautiful. And what they do is they have a broad stroke artistic overlay. They're not perfect. That's fine. This is and everyone acknowledges that, but it's a really great place to start, of these habitat mosaics. So you can see where I am and where some of you are is in ecoregion 59. So we're trying to make ecoregion, the coolest thing there is to know your ecoregion. Like we all knew our watershed and our food shed. Now we want to know our ecoregions. So what the point of this is any of the native plant genetics, the wild types that you can collect through ecoregion 59, you're pretty safe knowing that you can proliferate them anywhere throughout ecoregion 59 and know that you're putting the right plants in the right place. And so what an ecotype is it just references that genotype, those wild genetics of place that if we put our bug eyes on, the bugs don't see where Connecticut ends and Massachusetts begins. They see the riparian corridors and the broadleaf forests. And when we do that, we know that we need to create these ecological corridors that have the heirlooms that they've stewarded where they want it, right? I do have a video that explains this for 3 minutes. And so I will share that with you quickly. And Lydia, just let me know if the sound is working. I don't hear anything. Well, the sound, because it sounds off. Okay.
They see.
There it goes.
All right. Here we go.
Our pollinators don't see property boundaries and state lines. They see host plants, blooms, and spots to nest. Land trusts and public parks do an amazing job protecting the wilderness, but their land alone will never be enough to provide habitat for the diverse wildlife on which our world relies. We need to engage all property owners, from homes to highway medians, schoolyards to farms, to provide corridors for insects, birds, and mammals. But restoring habitat starts with native plants. These are the species that have co-evolved with the climate and ecosystem of our area and are best suited to thrive here. Something many of us don't realize is that most native plants sold in the Northeast are grown from seed from the Midwest and beyond. So how can we get the right plants in the right place? This is where the Ecotype project comes into play, helping to repopulate the northeastern landscape with our own local native plants.
We are scientists, farmers, homeowners, and conservationists working together to create a more robust, abundant, resilient landscape. The process starts with botanists sustainably collecting seed from wild plants in our own ecoregion. This seed is grown out by farmers to establish what we call founders plots. From these plots, farmers are able to harvest thousands of new seeds each season. Then, the seed savers step in, and the seed is cleaned, counted, and prepared for nursery production. These valuable seeds are then grown out by the tens of thousands at local nurseries. Finally, with the collective efforts of landscapers, gardeners, conservation groups, river keepers, and concerned homeowners, these plants find their way into the ground.
By planting ecotype plants, we are restoring diversity to our ecosystem, supporting our farmers and food system, and creating a more resilient landscape. No longer do we see nature as being constrained to a few remaining parks and preserves, but instead as a massive, interconnected system of land and people in which we, you, play a vital role. The land preserved matters, as does the farm and the backyard. Together, we can work towards a more diverse and connected environment.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching that. Of course, the Native Plant Working Group gets a big thank you. I will figure out how to get back to, let's see. Am I back? Is that full screen, Lydia, or?
Yes, hang on. I don't know if you're full screen, but I do see your,
Okay.
yes.
Okie doke. All right. So hopefully that helps clarify a great overview. And certainly the best part of the Ecotype project is it does take everyone. The pollinator pathways have been so helpful in really making everyone so interested and aware of the native plant conversation around conservation, and helping to support our pollinators, the Native Plant Working Group, Aspetuck Land Trust. The list goes on, and we're so grateful for all of these strategic partners, because that's how we make this all, make more people aware of it and get it out in the land. So why does CT Nofa have a pollinator health initiative? Well, they want to grow organic food and promote organic land care in Connecticut. And to do that, right, we need to have our pollinators. So you can see on the left, those blueberries were not properly pollinated, and the ones on the right are properly pollinated. So Dina Brewster, who's executive director of CT Nofa and has Hickory's Organic Farm in Ridgefield, she says, these pollinators are really help paying my wages, right? We need to have the habitat that they need so we can provide the food that our local residents need. And so it's this very reciprocal relationship where we need to make sure that they have their food too. So in an effort to do that, this is what those beautiful founder plots look like. And you can see the Joe pieweed on the left and the New York ironweed on the right. And this is at the Hickories. And so as we've talked about all these different forms of seed banking, this is in situ, so in place seed banking, which is always your best option because it remains viable and it's adapting, and the native seeds are falling into the soil and going through the snow, wind, rain, freeze, thaw. They're adapting to their local pests and beneficial insects. this is where you want your plants growing. So what we're trying to do, or what we are doing at the Ecotype project, is really fortifying our living seed banks, making sure that these seeds are in our soil profiles so that they can proliferate through all of their natural mechanisms. I am a huge lover of all naturalist words and it's very scientific terms. So there's these great list of words called the Ecoregions, and they speak to how seeds are dispersed. Just a short list: anemochory is the dispersal of seed by wind. So if you think about the dandelions that you see floating with their helicopter, or with their puffy little pappuses, those white puffs, a lot of our native seeds all have those pappuses, and that's because they use wind as their main dispersal mechanism. You also have hydrochory, which we'll talk about when I paddled the botanical expedition. But as seeds fall in the water, they get taken down by the stream and go along the seed banks. There's even myrmecory. One of my favorites is the dispersal of seed by ants. So, because myrmecology, a fascinating study, talks all about the sociological structures of ants, and they're brilliant creatures, but for another talk. But if you look then, once we put these back out, and of course, ornithochory, right? The birds are going to eat it and they're going to compost them around. And there's also anthropochory, the dispersal of seeds by humans. So when we do that, we need to take a couple of things into consideration. We need to make sure that we're bringing as much diversity onto our farm as possible, because the more diversity of species we have, the more diversity of species we have, the more the more beneficial insects we're able to host. We also need to make sure that we're acknowledging all of the different bloom times. So I heard this wonderful woman from the South talk, and she said, it's like if you invited house guests over for a week and only fed them on Monday, y'all. So it's basically saying, you can't just have flowers that bloom in the spring. We need early spring through late spring, early summer, late fall, and so forth. So we really want to make sure we're paying attention to that. And also, if you look at the non-monoculture of a perennial polycultural guild, or how are the patterns that we find in our natural forests and ecosystems, you want to make sure you have different plants that are at the different trophic layers, your ground covers, your shrubs, of course, your trees. And why is this important? Well, Doug Tallamy, of course, in his great book, Bringing Nature Home, is talking about how many species of caterpillars live on our native white oaks, and then how all of our songbirds need that to feed off of them to support their local health and that ecology. And just to help with some of the definitions, because there's a lot of jargon that goes into this. Natives versus nativars. What's a nativar? So oftentimes in the nursery trade, those native plants that you see are taken from cuttings, and they're selected based on their showiness quality. I really like how, these genetics, what their structure's like, what their blooms look like, what their color looks like, all of these different aesthetic choices mostly, which of course makes sense from, the landscape design perspective. But what that's doing, again, as we've shown with taro and with the onions, is creating these monocultures, because you're just repropagating that same genetics over and over again because you've selected for those certain characteristics. So what that does is really reduces the amount of genetic diversity. So what we're doing with ecotypes is making sure we're taking sustainably, with botanists who have permission and know what they're doing. We take the seeds from the wild and are proliferating them on those founders plots, right, as our specialty crop, because we do a lot of this work under the USDA specialty crop block grant. And what our specialty crop is the seed. So we harvest that seed and get it to the nursery growers so that they can have these genetics that preserve these arcs of diversity. Because what we want to make sure is whatever landscape you're on, there's inherent genetics that can adapt to these locations in our backyards, in our land trusts, and so forth. And the problem is that these seeds and these types of genetics are not readily available on the commercial trade. So a lot of what we're doing is making this pipeline to make them more available. sorry, not to make you nauseous going back and forth from slides, but this comes from the Wild Seed Project. And if you don't know about Heather McCargo's initiative in Maine, it is an excellent resource. And she has a beautiful yearly periodical that just has such artistic illustrations and easy to follow instructions around working with natives and perennials. And she has this pledge to rewild that she's promoting now, where it says, I'll put 70% native plants back in my landscape. And she's just a wealth of information. So I would recommend checking her out. So again, this is just an infographic to help streamline what you heard in our video. Our botanists could collect this native wild seed, and it's selected by bloom times and which pollinators and beneficials they host. We find different founder plot farmers. So that's what our project is all about. We have a whole bunch of new founder plot farmers on for this season, which is very exciting. And they grow out 200 plugs of these species. And then I and others will go in as the seed collectors, and we collect this seed and then go through the wonderful joys of cleaning, which is different for each seed and takes a lot of fun investigation to do. And then we'll get these seeds out to our nursery growers, such as Daryl Newman at Planter's Choice has been a huge supporter of this. And now Gilbert's is signed on board. And then through plant sales, such as the Aspetuck Land Trust, in New Canaan, there's Planet New Canaan, the Wilton High School, Litchfield is now doing a plant sale. We get these plugs out to the gardeners and landscapers and into our backyards, and we're reducing fragmentation by proliferating these shared corridors of pollinator habitat with the right plants in the right place. So it's really exciting work. And this shows Jordy Elkins, our main botanist, going out there and scouting for these seeds. And depending on the funding that comes in, we're able to bring more species online, but this is Spartina. And as we think about needing to do coastal restoration, we really want to start working with these halophytes, or the salt tolerant plants. So, and we really want to be working with grasses and more spring ephemerals. And so through the guidance of the Native Plant Working Group and other organizations, we're helping to steer what those species should be and what directions we should go in. So for you all who I know are quite well versed in Latin and in plants, these are the species that we have so far in the pipeline. Right now, the seed is just available for our founder plot farmers, but hopefully in the future, we're working as quickly as we can to start a seed collective to make these seeds more readily available to homeowners and garden clubs and so forth that want to help promote these plants. So just some beautiful species this yarrow, I can just tell you, even late in the season, it just was glowing, this favorite chartreuse color that you can see on the back of all my slides. And they're just so spectacular. And you can see, as I'll show you in future slides, just the great proliferation of pollinators that come about. So just quickly again, these are some of the farmers that we've been working with. We have Andy Meek at Stone Acres, and you can just see all this life come back to your backyard and to your farms. Jean Linville and Abby Cartson, who are the main founder plot farmers at the Hickories, they were saying, we're not seeing any pollinators on the Rudbeckia. Like, what's going on here? And so what they started to do is they put on their headlamp with the red light on, and they started doing night monitoring. And lo and behold, at night was a whole other genre of pollinators. And they just had so much fun going out and monitoring them. And like, we have these entomological safaris in our backyard, and we put these plants back there. We're rejoining in this great symphony of ecology that's happening all around us. So we just had so much fun. And I'm not an entomologist, so I am learning a lot as we see all these wonderful, beautiful creatures and just on these beautiful plants. I'm sure you all have had similar experiences. But what we realized is, if we want to bring on new farmers, this isn't just planting your annual tomato. There are some nuance that go into planting these perennials. And so again, the wonderful Jean Linville, what she did is she created this Getting Started toolkit. So I've listed my website on my slides, but ctnofa.org/ecotype project. At the very bottom, you will find all of these cards I'm showing you as free downloadable PDFs. And so what we did is we have a getting started tool, a getting started growing card. So it tells you just the basic general for growing these that apply to all species, and also a general seed saving card. But then what we've done is for 7 of the species so far, we're working on doing the new cards for our new species. We tell you the plant characteristics, their desired site location, their ecological benefits, who their pollinator partners are, and just give you the basics of what you need to know to work with these species. So as I think most of you may already have gardens with some native plants in it, there's also the fun process of, after we've planted these seeds, then these plants, then they go back to seed. And the interesting thing is we don't often think about it, but seeds are fruits. So they have times when they have their perfect maturity and ripeness, just like any other fruit. And so as a seed collector, we're monitoring these stands because they don't all, I'm trying to see if I have this slide in here. No, but they won't all go to seed at the same time. So this is the ironweed, and it's perfectly ripe when it just pulls off very easily those tufts, because that is when the wind would be able to take them very easily. So at this point, we are collecting the seed, we clean the seed. You can see those different sieves. Those are used in soil science, but they work great if you find the right combination for cleaning those seeds. So I'll use that car mat, that black mat you see the seeds on, you rub it to get the pappus off. And you only want to rub it after you've really dried these seeds out and you've really desiccated them out, because while they're still a little bit green, if you rub them too hard, they just kind of crack open and lose all their viability. So let your seeds dry out in a brown paper bag, rub them to get the pappus off, and then you can sift them through these screens. Now, for the home scale, do you need to remove the pappus? No. For our purposes, it is helpful to have them be more uniform. And then, so there you can see another picture of the Vernonia. And so this, again, these cards tell you when we were sowing them, when you can expect to collect seeds, what the seed looks like. Because sometimes there's a lot of chaff in there and you go, is that the seed? I don't know, maybe that's the seed. And so in an effort to help with the seed cleaning process, to make larger amplifications and amounts of this seed available, with one of our grants, we were able to purchase this great winnow wizard. So the winnow wizard, there's a wonderful gentleman in Oregon named Frank Morton with Wild Garden Seed. And he is one of the greatest lettuce breeders in our country. So if you like lettuce and want to see colors you never thought imaginable, check out Wild Garden Seed. But one of the seed farmers there was sick of using these little clipper machines that aren't very effective. And so he created this great winnowing machine that has these metal slots that can regulate how much airflow comes in. You put the seeds in the hopper in the top and it drops down with these magnets. And then by the weight of your seed, you'll move those buckets out to certain distances. And it's a really great resource. And we're hoping in the future to be able to train our other founder plot farmers how to use it so that they can have this resource, so that we can join together to have this Northeast truly local native ecotypic seed mix. So here you can see, this is a great moment of pride that kind of brings so many people that have worked together to make these jars possible. So this is some of the first organic, ecotypic, truly local native pollinator seed for the Northeast. And in our whole effort of finding the other folks, there's, Polly Wiegand with the Long Island Plant Initiative. There are a couple other folks in some of the surrounding states that are doing this. And we're really all trying to join together and fill the gaps in where our supply chain is to make our native seed production as streamlined as it is in other parts of our country, where perhaps seed production is a bit easier because of climate, or they have these huge storage facilities or seed extractories that do the cleaning for you. But there are people doing this, and we are working to bridge them all together so we can have these seeds be more widely available for you all, and then hopefully for bigger municipality organizations like the Department of Transportation, who just has huge swaths of land, and they're under that Pollinator Act that says they have to use native seed if and when available, but it hasn't been available. And there's some great folks from the DOT that are on the native plant working group, and they're just as excited about this as we are. So the more of us that work together, the more that the homeowners and the gardeners are looking for the Ecotype project. So this logo means we are a socially conscious brand. And so when you're supporting this, you're supporting the founder plot farmers, the botanists who we're always, looking for more field botanists, to the nursery growers. And this really is increasing the demand to your local nursery grower, saying like, we want to support ecotypic seed. And just like we had the great movement to know your farmers, that's been happening for the past 2 decades or so. Now it's really time to know your nursery growers and know your botanists and know your native plants. And I know with all the work that Wild Ones does, and with your seed sales, and with that great proliferation of that knowledge in those local collections that you're doing, you're all already, I think I'm hopefully not preaching, but singing to the choir. And just quickly, as Lydia mentioned, I am honored to be a Wings World Quest flag carrier. That is one of the best organizations that supports women in science. I am a member of the Explorers Club, which is kind of, the Shackletons and all these great explorers. So for me, that's what I, start to blush and get excited about, is being on expedition. And that to me is just proliferating science through adventure is really what makes my heart sing. And to paddle a river with 500 native plants brings tears to my eyes. So what we did is we took 500 native plants and we paddled from the John Ledyard Canoe Club at Dartmouth. And John Ledyard is a great story on its own. He was in one of the first classes at Dartmouth, dropped out, built a dugout canoe, paddled the Connecticut River to his uncle's in Hartford, hopped on a steamship to England, and was on James Cook's expeditions. So I wanted to pay homage to him. But it wasn't until we did a 1.5 mile portage with all these plants and boats past Bellows Falls that we were actually in Ecoregion 59. So as we paddled for the pollinators on the botanical expedition, because I say I'm not a botanist, I'm a botanist, we waited until we were in the right place to put these right plants. And we planted them in these beautiful wilderness campsites that we had gotten permission from. And I can't tell you, after we put those in, I looked up, there was 2 bald eagles soaring overhead. And I looked as we were paddling, and you see these other wild populations of these same plants that we're bringing home. And it felt so great to know the Ecoregions were there, that the wind and the water and the birds were all going to carry these down this beautiful riparian corridor that's been such an important ancestral byway for so many indigenous tribes and animals and insects. To then be helping proliferate that back along these riparian corridors seemed like such a privilege. And I'll be paddling the second section from where we ended at the Massachusetts border to Long Island Sound at some point from now until the summer. We're still finalizing those dates, but just to see what the river looked like. This is what it looked like as we were paddling down with 9 other of my botanical explorers. And I think when we think about expeditions in science, people think you have to go somewhere exotic or get on a plane, but there's so much gorgeous, extraordinary nature in our own backyards. So as citizen scientists doing this important pollinator health work, and as citizen explorers, let's really protect and proliferate the wildlands that surround us and that we're a part of. My great mentor, Bill McDermott, who, if you ever want to deep dive into seed saving, he has the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and they teach something called Seed School. And now, of course, there's Seed School online, and that takes you from being a beginning seed saver to having your own seed company. They'll cover everything, and that's where I learned. And he and Bell Starr, his partner, used to be the executive directors at Native Seed Search, which was in Arizona and safeguarding a lot of the Southwest indigenous tribe seeds, from the Hopi to the Navajo and the the Tarahumara down in the Sierra Madres in Mexico. And that was when I walked into their seed vault for the first time. And I said, this is what I shall dedicate my life to. But as we've seen, just thinking seed conservation is what you're doing, there's the disaster response, the community seed banks, the seed libraries, the ecotypic native plant work. There's so much to be done. And each of these magnificent plants that we see around us, they all have a seed. So become a detective and look for those seeds, because Bill McDermott would take a seed in his hand and an iPhone, and he would say, which one has the greatest technology? And he would say the seed, because it's been adapting since time immemorial. It carries all of the history and the lineage of all that have stewarded that from our ancestors to all those that come after us. And so he says we are the people of the pinch. At a pinch in time in our genetic biodiversity, when we can either stand by and watch this massive erosion, or we can stand in as stewards and caretakers to reproliferate the wild lands that have been anthropocentrically shifted, because the ROI of seeds is so magnificent. We plant one seed, and in a row of those 200 plants come from one seed off the Joe Pye and the New York ironweed. In 2 years, we were collecting millions of seeds. And even the first year, there was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of seeds. So it's really quite positive. And so with the often doom and gloom that happens around climate change, I say it's too late to be pessimistic. And if all of us together are saving seeds, then these seeds save. So with that, our seed safari has come to a visual conclusion, but certainly if there's more time, I'm happy to answer any questions or provide resources or help with any of the myriad things I just awkeried onto you. So thanks, Lydia.
Thank you, Sefra. That was great. Let me just take a scan through the chat. I think there are a couple of questions. I know I had a few. So a couple of questions came in as to whether or not there are any retailers, or is there a way to get Ecotype plugs without having to go all the way out to your neck of the woods? I know it's not that far, but many of us in southeastern Connecticut are curious to know. I know you mentioned you've got a grower here, Stoneacre Farms, but is there also a seller?
As of right now, there isn't a plant sale up there. I think with the Aspetuck Land Trust, there was some talk of them being able to do bigger deliveries. Like I think Planter's Choice, perhaps, like if there's a big order from a certain area, they may be able to just deliver it to one central location. Mm-hmm. But I am not saying that from a fully confident place. But there are a lot of other, Stoneacres doesn't have an Ecotype plant sale yet, but they are great with their founders plots. There's a lot going on with Litchfield, but I don't know for where you all are. But the best bet would be to reach out to the Aspetuck Land Trust and see if they ended up doing that sort of delivery. And I can certainly check on that for you and follow up with you, Lydia, to see if that's something that they're going to do.
Okay, thanks, Sefra. And I know we're only in year 2 of the project, so I think is it fair to say it's still in the ramp up phase?
Oh, well, Planter's Choice, Daryl has not just sourced seeds from the Ecotype project, he's also been working with Native Plant Trust, which of course is a wonderful organization. And so he now has 40 ecotypic species. And so we work with him to get our plugs as well, so we can put in some Zizia and have more of these springtime bloomers. So he really has quite a great list of them. So we are in our third year here, but hopefully with all of these new ecotypes that are now being produced by the nursery growers and all the new farmers that are coming on, very soon we will have a lot more to share with everyone. And we've encouraged these founder plot farmers to, if they get a seed seller's license and if they have enough producing seed, then perhaps, they can start taking cuttings and have their own plant sales, because it really is such an important value add. And even though plant cuttings isn't that direct proliferation of all of those wild genetics, it still is amazing to have those ecotypic plants on your property. And then when they go to seed, there is, I mean, within wild plants, as you all know, there's so much variation that happens because there's so much wild genetics in there. And that's really what we're trying to preserve and proliferate. And they do look gorgeous on the landscape, right, Lydia? I mean, you all have done so much native planting.
Well, thank you. We like to think so anyway, but we can always do more. Just to go back and add a comment to what you said, Sefra, I think, I totally agree with you. I think, it's always challenging trying to make a viable business out of native plants. And so the use of cuttings, if it's done in a limited way and done in a proper way, like at the very last step. So if you're using stock that is genetically diverse and doing a final amplification by cutting, just so you have more to sell. I think that's what Yarrow tends to look at it, is an accepted practice. So, and it's still much, much better than, having these few clonal cultivars that are being sold nationally that, are so restricted in their diversity and not locally adapted, except to where they were selected perhaps. But even then, their diversity is frozen and not allowed to evolve. Let me see. I did have a sort of a nuanced question could you elaborate a little more on how did you pick the initial species for the Ecotype project? Or is there kind of an underlying kind of philosophy as to which species are being selected and grown up? I guess you did say they're for pollinators. So they're picking really good pollinator plants for starters, right?
Right. No, it's a great question. And so Jordy Elkins, as I mentioned before, finding trained botanists, if any of you out there know any, we're always looking for more, because right now we are predominantly relying on the wonderful Jordy Elkins from Highstead, which is in Reading, Connecticut. And he's been going out there and doing these ecotypic seed collections for a while. And so I think when this idea came out of the Native Plant Working Group, even before I was on board with it, it was really looking towards what species Jordy had collected. And oftentimes he was doing those collections for the species that do seem to have the most overarching benefits for the most amount of beneficials and pollinators. And also, as we had no idea the receptivity of those in the market wanting to buy this, we were kind of also going with some of the species that perhaps gardeners and homeowners were a little bit more familiar with, and that maybe were a little bit showier, just so as we're kind of paving this new pathway or reweaving this new pathway and connecting all the people doing the different parts that make this possible. If we have the asters and the rudbeckia and we have the yarrows and we have the joe pies, then these are really approachable species for folks to get behind. So that's where we started. Certainly there's been questions about doing rare species, and that's not something we're taking on right now, because we're just trying to amplify the workhorses so that we can proliferate them out as much as possible. If farmers that we're bringing on want to contract grow rare species for restoration, I think that's a slightly different thing right now. But we also, again, wanted to acknowledge that we're covering the different bloom times as best as we can, and we're still really need to fill that early spring bloom time. And hopefully the different habitats, some people have land where the plant's feet are wet, some it's dry, and some it's shady. So we're really trying to fill out all those different arcs and needs of those little ecotones.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I know there's an awful lot of growing rare species sort of raises a whole lot of issues. And I think until those issues can be sort of, that the experts can wrap their heads around them and figure out the best way to do that, that doesn't put any risk to our native wild populations. I think those are the greatest concerns. And it's not just over collecting, but I think unintentional, well-intended gardeners can inadvertently do harm. And it's complicated. It's not something I even would say I fully understand right now. And so that's why it's, you probably won't see rare species being offered unless they are the very selected things like trilliums that are being grown horticulturally. And there are varieties that, for example, Native Plant Trust or other very select nurseries, maybe White Flower Farms, do offer. So there are some, of those types of plants.
Well, I would just have to say to you all who've been working with native plants, I mean, I think I've learned in my seed huntressing expeditions, the more you know you don't know, because here you think you know something about seeds, and then I jump into native plants and I might as well have been back in kindergarten on the ecological scale. I've had to relearn everything, and I just so love that about the diversity of nature is there's endless. I mean, this is a lifetime dedication, right? Because we can never presume to, there's so much to learn and new plants everywhere you go. So,
okay, there are a couple more questions here from other people, so let me not hog the Q&A here. So there was a question about whether Ecotype project is thinking of expanding into any of the woodies, trees or shrub seeds. There was particular interest here, and kind of as almost a separate question, are they involved at all in trying to preserve the genetic diversity of native ash until we get the ash borer under control, and then, as a restoration kind of effort?
I mean, we would love nothing more. The unfortunately, what that falls to is kind of funding and a grant that could support that work. There are such great organizations, especially in New York. When I was at Cornell, I did some research on hazelnuts, and I worked with the New York Nut Growers Association, the Ninjas, and they're just these great tannin-soaked hand folks who have such beautiful ecotypic tree seeds. And ultimately, what we need to do is have with working groups and with universities, because now the universities are reaching out and they want to get involved. And the more that we find available land and interested people that can do more of these longevity studies, what pollinators are actually coming here, what's happening, then we can start to have more long-standing plots. And perhaps in those areas or at some of the research stations, we can start having woodies and these trees in areas that they can be caretaken from and then propagated out from. But I'm sure Daryl at Planter's Choice, he of course at some point, we all want to go in that direction. We're just kind of cultivating the right resources and funds to support the people that can bring that to fruition. But yeah, the ash would be great. There's so many beautiful trees that we can't wait for that.
Okay, and let me put this question to you as well. I put one answer into the chat, but a question about how people can get their local nursery to carry more native plants, and in particular get them to appreciate that we desire ecotype plants, not the plants just that come from far away.
I know that Daryl has been reaching out to certain other nursery retail nurseries, and he's been Daryl Newman, I'm sorry, from Planter's Choice. He's been working on helping to facilitate those conversations. But I mean, I don't know if Lydia, you have any advice on this, but my guess would be just to be asking them. And if I think of enough people are asking, then they understand that there's a demand for it. But what would you say to that, Lydia?
No, I totally agree. That was my answer, which is that people should ask for them. They should be, not hesitant to ask for what they want, to ask questions about also the aspects of the plant that are important. Was this plant grown without pesticides? If it's not labeled organic, you should ask the question, because if you're growing them for pollinators, you don't want, to bring home a risk, even a short-term risk.
Right.
And
so
plants actually, and I did mention, I put in the chat that I will be mailing out to everybody who participated in this program is a little sheet that I just drew up, an information, a very little one-pager that you can hand out to your nursery if they don't know about Ecotype project, and said, I heard about these great plants, and
oh, cool,
you would carry them. Yeah, and I actually have talked to Darrow, and I gave him a few suggestions of local nurseries I might approach who I think would be more inclined. And they're
Oh,
also
great.
small, more independent nurseries in our region. So.
And I think that's really such a strength of having the strategic roundtable partnership through the Native Plant Working Group. And also I would love to see what's going on up at Coogan Farms too. There's some, I would love to come back. So where would a central area be where you all are? Because I think as I'm thinking now, what I remembered Assateague Land Trust doing was someone from a garden club or group would like rent a van or a truck and then go pick up the order from Assateague and then bring it to a central place where then everyone would pick it up. I think that's what they did last year.
Yeah, I don't know that I can give you a straight answer to that right now. There are certainly some possibilities. Since the Wild Ones is sponsored by the Connecticut College Arboretum, we might be able to make an arrangement through the Arboretum. I mean, obviously it's going to depend right now on their COVID policies and all of that.
Right. It's a confusing time, but in the future.
In the future, certainly.
In the future, yeah.
The Arboretum is, very supportive and interested in these kinds of things. So that might be a possible location for Southeastern Connecticut.
I see a question from Fatima about how do you make sure a seed belongs to a specific ecoregion?
Yes.
So again, we have not gotten to the point where we're doing genetic testing. That is something we'd love to do in the future. But how we're ensuring ours are ecotypes is on the knowledge base of our trained botanists. So Jordy Elkins, again at Highstead, working off of, as I mentioned, those SOS protocols that have very strict guidelines on identifying wild stands, population size, collection, and so forth. And so once you go through those protocols, you're ensuring that you're collecting plants that have been there for a while. Now, I was at the ELA conference, virtual ELA conference, and I heard a great hour-long discussion on the definition of native. So obviously, when we go back into how long have those plants been there, then we get into a whole nother conversation. But by them deeming that they're ecotypes, we go off of the botanist's selection characteristics and go from there. But we do want to do genetic testing coming in future years to ensure that it is what we all are saying it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, and obviously just, well, like in anything in biology, it's a tricky thing. It's like we have the technologies now, but you need the correlation between your new technology, the genetics, and knowing, in comparing, we have to have like reference seeds from the different regions to establish those standards. So it'll take a while. So I guess, yeah, the answer to Fatima's question is good old fashioned seed genealogy, right? We have to know where the seeds came from. And how long it's been growing there.
And I think it's really great to all work together because Ken Green of Hudson Valley Seeds, he started something called seedshed.org. And just to introduce another term or fun vocabulary, but a seed shed, if we think about a watershed, right? We all know the water, it's like where all the water collects topographically. But we think about a seed shed, and if we really want to have a viable regenerative form of agriculture, having these stands on our farms to proliferate regenerative agriculture, we want to have our seed growers, our seed producers, and our nurserymen all in our bioregion. And what that does is that fortifies a seed shed. So all the different facets of it are within that local area, just like we have our local food sheds. And so now we're just applying all those same principles and concepts and patterns, permaculture, to seeds.
Okay, and then a final question came in. So one large purveyor that claims to sell native plants is this brand called, I'm sure you're familiar with it, American Beauty. Do you know anything about their growing practices, or would one have to ask them directly? So there's a question here about whether or not, for example, they use pesticides, because I guess they don't say so on their website. I mean, they don't say whether they do or not, but they are rather large scale growers. So I think there's a question about that.
I cannot say for sure on that. Where I would recommend, and Lydia, let me know what you think. I would recommend going to the Xerxes Society, right? Because doesn't Xerxes have a whole list of who they recommend buying from and who doesn't use neonics and stuff for their natives? Have you seen that?
I haven't seen the list. I know they actually are running an advocacy campaign right now, and I should have had those links for you. I apologize. I don't have them at my fingertips. I can, again, send them out in a follow-up email. That they also have information that people can bring to their nurseries to help ask them to guide the conversation about pollinator-friendly plants and good practices, nursery practices,
Right.
so that you are buying plants that won't hurt pollinators.
Right. There was that great flyer that Emily May shared with us, right? That was speaking towards their new initiative.
Right. We've got a
and-
couple of fact sheets and flyers, so that.
Right.
And,
So I think those could be helpful. And then I see a mention about earth tones. Earth tones is fantastic. I went up towards that neck of the woods because I go and harvest spring water sometimes, and that was right near earth tones. And the thing, it is such a beautiful place. I can't believe it's like right on that marshy bog area. It's gorgeous. But actually the Yarrow that's in the Ecotype project, that's an Ecotype from earth tones. So even though 99% of what we have on there is from Jordy, we also have this wonderful woman named Aubrey who is a great seed collector, and yeah, that Yarrow does come from earth tones. So yeah, they're a fantastic nursery.
Yeah, and I understand actually Kurt, the couple that owns Earth Tones, the husband,
Lisa.
He's the boss. So Lisa and Kurt is again a trained botanist. So I think when he does environmental consults, there are occasions where he has permissions and opportunities to collect seed, so that some of the plants they grow, many of the plants they grow, I don't know about that I could say all, but many of the plants that Earth Tones grows are from seed that they themselves have sourced locally.
Which I think is great. And I think the only thing that the Ecotype project is trying to do, or encourage botanists and other nurseries to do, is maybe perhaps have a uniform way of cataloging that provenance, because sometimes those practices are, I think they are just assumed, and they're such great practices. But going forward, if we want to be able to ensure the ecotypic nature of it, then I think it'll be helpful to create a framework that we can all collectively use around the data of what, where, and when we collect that seed.
Well, I mean, I guess in my mind, that would be a wonderful goal for the Native Plant Working Group to maybe help
that's true.
support or coordinate, is to come up with those standards that could be shared, even if they're voluntary, or some kind of a certification process.
Right. Because that's a lot of what we're doing, is creating the nursery protocols, the botanist protocols, the founder plot farmer protocols. We're just creating protocols so that we know when we put that socially conscious brand, the Ecotype project, on it, that we're ensuring that baseline throughout that whole cycle, as you saw, that it takes to get from seed to wild to your backyards.
Okay. All right. So I think that's all the questions I see in the chat. If anybody else has questions and either wants to raise their hand, or we can try just opening the floor. And if it gets too chaotic, I'll ask people to raise their hand or something. But yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question of Sefra, or if you have a general gardening question, and maybe since we have a number of experts still at the meeting, somebody will have an answer.
Thank you all so much. I hope to meet you all in person at some point, and yeah, hope to get Ecotypes to all of you.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually be a really fun field trip, I think, to come out to see one of the, like hickories, or one of the farms that are growing founder plots, or see the winnow wizard at work. I know at Wild Ones, we had so much fun with our seed sale this year. It was done on fairly short notice, but I'm hoping that next year there seems to be quite a bit of enthusiasm to do it again, but that we can get more people involved and learning how to properly collect and process and package the seeds so that we can do it again.
Well, we'd love to have you. And certainly this next year at Stone Acres, I don't know how their volunteer system works, but if anyone on this call, when it comes time to collect seed there, I'll be going up to do seed collections then, and that could be a fun thing for us all to do.
That would be fantastic if if we can work out a way to do this, in a way that's acceptable also to Stone Acres. I mean, we don't want
and I don't know all those answers, but it sounds fun.
But that would be so great. Okay, any questions? Or I guess there are too many experts here, so Everybody.
I am not an expert on gardening. That much I know.
I just wanted to mention, if there's anybody who, has native seeds and maybe like myself tends to either procrastinate or just get way behind, has too many things going on. If you haven't stratified your seeds yet, it's not too late. Our last frost date along the coast is somewhere in, I think the Farmer's Almanac or the weather, services say it's late April. So we really still have a couple, almost a month of definitely of cool weather. Or to be on the safe side, you can do the artificial stratification in your refrigerator. And which means just put the seeds in some kind of a moist substrate. If they're big seeds, ones that you can handle individually, you can use paper towel or a coffee filter or whatever. If they're really small seeds, what I like to do is mix them with some clean sand or peat moss or some other little planting substrate. So take the amount of seed and the amount of sand that you might want to scatter on one pot and put that into a tiny little Ziploc. Moisten it just enough so it holds together, not soggy, and then just stick that in your fridge for a month. Even the seeds that say they need 60 days, you can kind of cut it a little shorter and you'll probably be okay. You'll get good germination, maybe not the best germination, but you will get plants to germinate. So that will be my comment to anybody who's still has some seeds and going like, can I plant these this year? And
Yeah.
Even if they don't germinate right away, again, this is one of the things that I'm learning too, as you say, Sefra, the learning about the nuances of native seed versus your more traditional garden seeds is because they're genetically diverse, they also biologically behave a little more as individuals. So they won't all germinate all at once. They'll germinate over a longer time period. And that's okay. You can take those first plants that germinate, gently tease them out of the pot and plant them, but save the rest. You may get more plants. You probably will get more plants. So and you'll learn as you grow them. You'll see these things, and they're perfectly normal, and that's just the way it works.
Yeah, I just put in the link for Heather McCargo's Wild Seed Project because she has so many of those beautiful illustrations that explain that. And I guess she was talking to Dina Brewster again at the Hickories, and she was saying that's the way native plants work. Even though it says 30, 60, 90 days, some of those seeds have the genetics to go at all different times. So just that basically they were saying that's how they're able to, the reason why these plants make millions of seeds is because they're not often finding themselves in the perfect optimal conditions, right? So with our help and our stewardship, they're gonna have a lot better chance. So
right, exactly.
Just go for it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly true. And you're right. I've been using some of Heather's resources, sharing some of her wonderful fact sheets and protocols, and trying some of them myself now. I used to do more of the artificial stratification, but I'm trying some pots outside this winter, and just seeing, learning how that works.
Well, Wild Ones has great resources too. So thank you so much.
Okay.
And hello, Lydia, can you hear me? This is Bruce McDonald.
Yes, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, so if there's a little time left now, I really enjoyed the presentation from Sefra. And as said in my comment, I would like to follow up somehow at some point and learn a little more about the taro blight in Samoa or Polynesia. I worked there for a little while in the Peace Corps, and the blight came well after I left, and I heard about it, but I never heard the resolution of the problem. And I'd like to learn a little more about that. Maybe I can contact you, offline. It's not a prime topic for we're not in that Ecotype region here in Connecticut. So,
well, Bruce, I would love to talk to you about the South Pacific. I actually wrote a peer-reviewed article that was in the Journal of Food Security about the work that I did down there. But I would, if you want, I put my email in the chat. It's just the Seed Huntress at Gmail. But certainly that would be great. I would love to show you the cartoon and share that article with you.
Great, perfect.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I guess we can just wrap it up a little early today and let everybody go outside and enjoy the beautiful weather. It's looking very spring-like outside. So thank you again, Sefra. That was a very inspiring talk. I think we've all learned a lot, and look forward to staying in touch. If we can work out something with stone acres particularly, I think that would be really fun.
Okay, well, let's make a plan. And thank you so much for having me. And good luck to everyone who just got seeds from your seed sale, growing all their seeds.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, it's kind of like the seed library idea. We hope that by putting those seeds out there, a few will eventually come back and we'll be able to keep that cycle going.
I love it. All right, enjoy the day, everybody.
Yes, enjoy
Thanks again.
everybody. So this meeting has been recorded, and so we should be able to make the recording available if there are people who would like to review it. And you can also save the chat, or I can save it and send it out in a follow-up email. But if you just go down to the 3 dots in the lower right of your chat box, I think there's an option to say save chat, and then you will have a text file with all the questions and links and other things that you can then cut and paste out. All right. Thank you, everybody.